Welcome to Mumblebee, where I mumble you into sleep, with stories that drift like soft breezes through your mind. On this channel, my tales wander without direction, meandering through dreamy landscapes and carrying you gently away from the day's worries. So close your eyes, relax, and let me guide you into the land of dreams, where the journey is just as important as the destination. Before you drift off, please give this video a like, as it really supports the channel. If these soothing stories help you relax, make sure to subscribe for more calming content. I'd also love to hear from you. Drop a comment with where you're from and what time you're tuning in. Sweet dreams. This is The Lost Balloon's Journey, Chapter 1, The Great Escape. Bobo the balloon had always been a bit curious. From the moment it was tied to the small hand of a child, it could feel the tug of the breeze, inviting it to explore the world beyond. Bobo was bright red, shiny, and round, with a little white string that dangled lazily in the wind. Most balloons, when tied to a hand, just bob up and down, content with their lot in life. But not Bobo. So, it wasn't entirely surprising when Bobo saw an opportunity to escape and took it. The child holding the string had turned away for just a moment, distracted by a butterfly fluttering nearby. And in that moment, a sudden gust of wind tugged the string out of the child's hand. Before anyone could stop it, Bobo was free, soaring up into the sky with a cheerful little bounce, twirling its string like a ribbon in a dance. Bobo floated higher, leaving behind the park, the ice cream stands, and the tiny dot of the child looking up in surprise. The city stretched out below like a patchwork quilt, the streets crisscrossing like lines drawn by a giant pencil. But Bobo didn't care about the city. It cared about where the wind was taking it. And the wind had quite a journey in mind. Bobo drifted past the tops of trees, where birds chirped in confusion at the sight of a balloon flying higher than they dared to go. It sailed over rooftops, above billboards, and past a tower where a clock struck noon. Each time the bell rang, Bobo bounced a little in the air, as if laughing. The wind was a playful thing, nudging Bobo this way and that, guiding it over hills and valleys until the city was just a memory below. Soon, the landscape began to change, and Bobo found itself floating over something entirely new. A vast, endless field that shimmered in shades of silver and gold, almost like a sea of coins glittering in the sun. It was beautiful, but also a bit strange. The field wasn't filled with grass or wheat or anything Bobo could recognize. Instead, it was covered in keys. Thousands, maybe millions of keys, all scattered across the ground, some upright like little soldiers, others lying flat, shining in the light. Bobo didn't know what they opened, or why there were so many, but it felt like it had drifted into a world where rules didn't apply, and everything was just a little bit upside down. As Bobo floated above the field of keys, it noticed something even stranger. A few of the keys had tiny legs. They were walking around, tapping their way across the ground, and occasionally hopping up, as if trying to catch Bobo's attention. One particularly shiny key, with a curly top, waved enthusiastically as Bobo floated past, its tiny legs skittering in a comical little dance. "Where are you going?" the shiny key called out, its voice high-pitched and cheerful. Bobo, not having a mouth, couldn't answer, but it dipped slightly, as if to say hello. and the key seemed satisfied with that. "Good luck, wherever it is," the key chirped, before scurrying off to join a group of other keys that were playing what looked suspiciously like hopscotch. Bobo continued to drift, the wind carrying it away from the field and over a small hill, leaving the tap-tap-tapping of the keys behind. The sky grew softer, a warm, pinkish hue spreading across the horizon. It was the kind of sky that made you feel like anything could happen, and Bobo felt a thrill of excitement as it floated along, eager to see what would come next. Eventually, the wind began to slow, and Bobo found itself gently descending, gliding down toward what looked like a giant, fluffy pillow that had been left out in the middle of a meadow. The closer it got, the more Bobo realized that the pillow was, in fact, a cloud that had fallen from the sky and decided to rest on the ground for a while. Bobo landed softly on the cloud, sinking just a little into its fluffy surface. It was cool and soft, and as Bobo settled in, the cloud let out a contented sigh, as if glad for the company. "Hello there," the cloud murmured, its voice low and sleepy. "You seem to be far from home." Bobo bounced up and down slightly, which the cloud took as a nod. The cloud didn't ask where Bobo was going or why it was there. Instead, it simply said, "Well, you're welcome to rest here for a while. The wind will come back when it's ready." And so, Bobo settled in, nestled in the fluffy, cool cloud, watching the sky change colors as the sun began to dip below the horizon. It had been a strange day, but a good one, full of surprises and new sights. Bobo was curious to see what other wonders the wind would bring, but for now, it was content to rest, floating gently on the cloud and letting the world drift by. The journey was just beginning, and Bobo had all the time in the world. Chapter 2: The Meadow of Melodic Mushrooms. Bobo wasn't sure how long it had been resting on the cloud. Time felt different up there, like it was stretching and bending in ways that didn't quite make sense. But eventually, the wind returned, gentle and insistent, nudging Bobo to float up once more, guiding it away from the fluffy cloud and back into the open sky. The wind carried Bobo over hills and valleys, past rivers that glowed a soft blue, as if they were lit from within. Birds flew alongside it for a while, their feathers shimmering like silver, but they eventually peeled away, disappearing into the distance. Bobo didn't mind. It was enjoying the ride, letting the wind take it wherever it pleased. Soon, Bobo drifted down toward a meadow filled with the most curious sight. Sprouting from the ground were mushrooms, tall, round, and colorful, with caps that swirled in shades of pink, blue, and green. But these weren't ordinary mushrooms. As Bobo floated closer, it could hear them, singing. Each mushroom hummed a different note, and together they created a melody that filled the meadow, drifting up into the sky and echoing off the distant hills. The music was soft and strange, like a lullaby that you'd half forgotten, but still found yourself humming from time to time. It was a tune that didn't quite have a beginning or an end. It just was, as if it had always been there, waiting to be heard. Bobo floated closer, curious. The mushrooms were swaying gently, as if dancing to their own music, their caps bobbing up and down. The wind carried Bobo lower until it was almost brushing against the tops of the mushrooms. One particularly large mushroom, with a cap that looked like it had been splattered with bright orange paint, tilted itself slightly upward as if acknowledging Bobo's presence. "You're not from around here, are you?" the mushroom said, its voice deep and resonant, like a note plucked on a cello. Bobo, of course, couldn't speak, but it bobbed up and down, and the mushroom seemed to understand. "Well, you're just in time," the mushroom continued. "We're about to start our evening concert. Would you care to join us?" Before Bobo could respond, the music changed. The mushroom's humming grew louder, and their swaying became more synchronized. It was as if the entire meadow had come to life, each mushroom adding its own unique note to the melody. Some notes were high and sweet, others low and rumbling, but they all blended together into a song that was both soothing and a little bit silly. Bobo bobbed along, letting the music carry it. The wind had slowed, almost as if it was content to let Bobo linger here for a while. The melody was enchanting, and Bobo could feel it vibrating through its string, making it tremble with delight. As the music swelled, something even stranger happened. Tiny glowing orbs began to rise from the ground, drifting up into the air like fireflies. Each orb pulsed in time with the music, changing colors as it floated higher and higher. Bobo watched, fascinated, as the orbs danced around it, forming patterns that seemed to change with every note. They twisted and spun, creating shapes that Bobo could barely comprehend, swirls and spirals, stars and circles, and patterns that looked like they were trying to tell a story, but kept getting distracted. The mushroom's melody grew softer, and the orbs began to drift away, disappearing into the twilight sky. One of them, a tiny blue orb that glowed brighter than the rest, floated over to Bobo and lingered beside it for a moment, as if trying to decide whether or not to follow the others. Then, with a playful little flicker, it darted up to Bobo's string and tied itself around it like a miniature lantern. "Well, look at that," said the large, orange-splattered mushroom. "Looks like you've made a friend." Bobo twirled its string, letting the tiny blue orb bounce and bob along with it. The orb seemed delighted, its glow pulsing in time with the faint remnants of the music. The wind stirred again, tugging gently at Bobo, as if reminding it that there was still more to see, more to explore. The mushroom's song began to fade, but it didn't end. It simply drifted away, carried by the wind, like a memory slipping through your fingers. The mushrooms gave a final sway, their caps tilting downward, and the meadow fell silent, though it still hummed with the echoes of the music that had filled it. The orange-splattered mushroom tipped its cap to Bobo. "Safe travels, little balloon, and take good care of that orb. It seems to like you." With a gentle tug, the wind lifted Bobo back into the air, carrying it away from the meadow of melodic mushrooms. The tiny blue orb clung to Bobo's string, its light flickering softly, as if to say, "I'm coming too." And so, Bobo floated onward, the melody of the mushroom still echoing faintly in its mind, the blue orb bouncing happily beside it. The wind was stronger now, pushing Bobo forward, and the sky was beginning to change again, the soft blues of twilight giving way to deeper, darker shades. Bobo didn't know where the wind was taking it, but it didn't matter. The journey was the adventure, and Bobo was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 3: Town of Wandering Windows. Bobo and the tiny blue orb drifted onward, carried by the wind into the darkening sky. The orb flickered contentedly, as if it were humming a song only it could hear. The wind was playful, swirling and twisting, and Bobo's string danced along, pulling it this way and that. Soon, Bobo noticed something peculiar on the horizon. Tiny dots of light, flickering on and off like blinking eyes. As Bobo floated closer, the dots of light grew larger, revealing themselves to be windows. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, scattered across a sprawling hillside. But there were no buildings, no houses to go with them. The windows simply floated in midair, frames and all, each one glowing with a soft, inviting light. Some were tall and narrow, others short and wide. A few even had little flower boxes attached, filled with flowers that seemed to be singing quietly to themselves. The windows weren't still. They wandered. They drifted across the hillside, gliding smoothly like clouds, occasionally bumping into one another, and then bouncing away as if playing an invisible game of tag. Each time two windows met, their lights would flicker briefly, and Bobo could hear a faint giggle, like the sound of rain tapping on a window pane. The wind brought Bobo closer, and as it did, one of the wandering windows drifted over, tilting slightly as if inspecting the balloon. It was a simple window, with a wooden frame painted bright yellow and a curtain that fluttered gently, even though there was no breeze. Through the glass, Bobo could see a room, an ordinary room, with a cozy armchair, a small table, and a flickering lamp. But the room didn't make sense. The lamp was upside down, hanging from the ceiling like a chandelier, and the armchair was sitting on the wall. There was a rug, but it was curled up in the corner, like a cat taking a nap. As Bobo peered inside, the room seemed to notice it, and the lamp flickered, casting playful shadows that danced across the armchair. The window slid open slightly, letting out a tiny puff of warm air. "Hello there," said a voice, cheerful and light, though it didn't seem to come from anywhere in particular. "I don't often get visitors." Bobo bobbed slightly, and the blue orb flickered as if in greeting. The window creaked open a bit wider, the curtain drawing back to reveal more of the room, which had now rearranged itself. The armchair was on the floor where it belonged, and the lamp had righted itself. But the rug was still curled up, as if it couldn't quite be bothered to straighten out. "I'm glad you stopped by," said the voice again, still warm and friendly. "Most balloons just drift on by without even a glance. I'm a window, you see, but I don't have a house, and that makes me a bit lonely. Would you like to look inside for a while?" Bobo didn't have eyes, but if it did, they would have been wide with curiosity. The wind nudged it closer, and Bobo drifted up to the open window, peeking inside. The room shifted slightly, the colors deepening, as if it was trying to make itself more interesting. The lamp flickered again, and the armchair wobbled, then settled down with a quiet creak, as if it was stretching. The blue orb floated closer to the glass, its light pulsing in time with the flicker of the lamp. For a moment, the room was still, and then it began to change. The walls rippled, as if they were made of water, and the furniture melted away, replaced by a meadow of tall, purple flowers. The flowers swayed gently, even though there was no wind, and the sky above them was a soft shade of orange, like the first light of dawn. The window seemed to smile, though windows don't usually have mouths. "I like to keep a few extra rooms around," it said. "You never know who might stop by." Bobo drifted back slightly, taking in the sight of the meadow beyond the glass. It was beautiful, but it also felt a little strange, like a dream that you can't quite remember when you wake up. The flowers whispered to each other, their petals brushing together, and Bobo could almost hear them say something, though the words didn't make any sense. "You should keep going," said the window, its voice softer now, as if it was sad to see Bobo leave. "There's more to see, and the wind won't wait forever. But if you ever come back, I'll be here, and I'll have a new room for you to look at. I promise." Bobo's string twitched, and the blue orb flickered brightly, as if to say goodbye. The window closed itself gently, the curtain falling back into place, and then it drifted away, gliding across the hillside to join the other wandering windows. Bobo watched it go, feeling a tiny pang of something, maybe sadness, or maybe just the thrill of knowing there was always more to discover. The wind stirred again, stronger this time, tugging Bobo upward. The hillside of wandering windows grew smaller, the flickering lights blending together until they looked like a sea of fireflies twinkling in the distance. The blue orb danced along beside Bobo, its light steady and bright, and Bobo felt a sense of excitement rising. The wind was carrying it somewhere new, somewhere strange and wonderful, and Bobo was ready, floating higher and higher, leaving the town of wandering windows behind. Whatever was waiting up ahead, Bobo knew it would be as strange and delightful as everything that had come before. After all, this was a journey where sense and logic had no place, and Bobo wouldn't have it any other way. Chapter 4. Cloud of Confetti Dreams. The wind carried Bobo higher, through a sky that had shifted from twilight blue to a rich, inky purple. Tiny stars began to appear, twinkling like tiny pinpricks of light. But they weren't alone. Bright, colorful flecks were drifting down from above, twirling and spinning as they caught the wind. At first, Bobo thought they were stars falling from the sky. But as one floated closer, it became clear. It was a piece of confetti. Bobo's string twitched with excitement as the wind lifted it into a swirling cloud of confetti. Reds, blues, greens, and gold sparkled around it, glittering like tiny bursts of fireworks. The confetti wasn't just drifting lazily. It was alive, darting and swirling around Bobo in a chaotic dance. The blue orb flickered along, its light reflecting off the shiny paper, making it look like a tiny disco ball. As Bobo floated deeper into the cloud, it became clear that this wasn't just confetti. It was a storm of tiny, colorful dreams. Each piece of confetti glowed faintly, pulsing with its own rhythm, as if it held a little spark of life. Bobo twirled in the air, letting the pieces brush past its surface, and with each touch, it felt a tiny flash of something, a feeling, a moment, a whisper of a thought. One piece of confetti zipped past and whispered, "I dreamed I could juggle the moon." Another drifted lazily by and sighed, "I once turned into a fish and swam through the sky." The confetti had voices, soft and fleeting, like murmurs heard just before waking up. Each one had its own story, a little snippet of nonsense that flickered and vanished before Bobo could grasp it fully. The wind picked up, sending the confetti whirling faster, forming little spirals and eddies. It was like being inside a kaleidoscope, colors shifting and changing with every twist and turn. The blue orb darted after a piece of confetti that had turned a bright electric green, chasing it in loops until both of them tumbled back toward Bobo's string, giggling, if an orb could giggle, as they did. Suddenly, the wind dipped, and Bobo found itself floating beside a particularly large piece of confetti. It was bright pink, with tiny silver stars scattered across it, and it was glowing brighter than all the rest. As Bobo drifted closer, The pink confetti began to expand, growing until it was as big as a blanket, flapping gently in the wind like a sail. "You're in quite a rush, aren't you?" said the pink confetti, its voice low and velvety, like a secret shared at a midnight party. "But there's no need to hurry. Every journey's better with a bit of dance." Before Bobo could respond, the pink confetti unfurled itself, stretching out into a wide, rippling ribbon. The other pieces of confetti flocked to it, forming patterns that swirled and shifted, creating shapes that didn't quite make sense but felt right all the same. Twisting spirals, flowers made of stars, and lines that looked like they were trying to spell out words but never quite managed to finish. The pink confetti fluttered around Bobo, wrapping it in a gentle hug that made it feel warm, even though it was just a balloon. "Do you know what's at the end of this wind?" the pink confetti asked, its voice soft and teasing. Bobo bobbed slightly, as if to say no, and the blue orb flickered brightly, as if to agree. The pink confetti shimmered, catching the starlight. "No one knows," it said with a playful lilt, "because the end keeps moving. But that's the fun of it, don't you think?" Bobo didn't have to think about it. It knew. The fun was in the journey, in the strange and wonderful things it had seen, in the way the wind never quite went where it expected. The pink confetti gave a little twirl, and the other pieces joined in, forming a spiral that spun faster and faster until it looked like a whirlpool of color. With a gentle nudge, the wind began to push Bobo upward again, lifting it out of the cloud of confetti. The colors thinned, scattering as if the pieces had suddenly remembered they had somewhere else to be. The pink confetti, now just a small, fluttering scrap, drifted alongside Bobo for a moment longer, then gave a little wave and let itself be carried away. "Good luck, little balloon," it called, its voice growing faint as it floated off into the distance. "May your string never tangle and your journey never end." Bobo's string twitched in response, and the blue orb flickered a little brighter, as if it had just been given a new spark of excitement. The wind was stronger now, carrying Bobo higher, faster, as if eager to show it what lay ahead. The confetti cloud dissolved behind it, the last few scraps of color twinkling like distant stars. As Bobo rose above the confetti storm, the sky stretched out wide and endless, a deep velvety black dotted with tiny glimmering lights. The blue orb bobbed beside Bobo, its light steady and warm, and Bobo felt a thrill of anticipation. The wind had a new destination, a new adventure, and Bobo was ready to see it, to float through it, to be a part of whatever strange and wonderful nonsense came next. And so, Bobo drifted onward, leaving the confetti dreams behind, its string dancing in the wind, carrying it further into the unknown. Chapter 5. Castle of Spinning Shadows. The wind pushed Bobo higher still, lifting it past the remnants of the confetti cloud and into a sky that seemed darker, deeper, and more mysterious than before. The blue orb twinkled beside it, its light glowing brighter, as if to reassure Bobo that they were still together, no matter how strange the journey became. Ahead, something began to emerge from the dark, a shape that was tall, jagged, and shifting. As Bobo drifted closer, the shape became clearer, revealing itself to be a castle, but not a castle like any you'd find in a storybook. This one was built entirely of shadows, its towers spinning slowly, twisting and curling as if they were made of smoke. The castle didn't sit on the ground, but hovered in midair, its shadowy walls undulating and rippling like the surface of a dark pond. The towers were different heights, some tall and spindly, others short and squat, and they seemed to be constantly rearranging themselves, moving in a slow, rhythmic dance. Bobo floated closer, feeling the air grow cooler, almost like a gentle breeze on an autumn evening. As it neared the castle, a shadow detached itself from one of the towers and drifted over, forming a vague, wispy shape that looked almost like a person, but not quite. The shadow had no face, no eyes, just a soft outline that flickered in the dark. "Well, what have we here?" the shadow said, its voice smooth and echoing, like a whisper that bounces off the walls of an empty room. "A little balloon, lost in the dark. How delightful." Bobo's string wobbled nervously, but the blue orb bobbed up and down, its light flickering brightly, as if to show it wasn't afraid. The shadow tilted its head, or what seemed like a head, and then gave a slow, graceful bow. "Welcome to the castle of spinning shadows," it said. "We don't get many visitors, but those who find their way here always leave with a little piece of the night." The shadow drifted closer, circling Bobo, its outline shifting and changing, sometimes tall and slender, sometimes short and round. "Would you like to see inside?" Before Bobo could respond, the wind nudged it forward, guiding it toward the castle's entrance, which was nothing more than an archway made of pure darkness. As Bobo floated through, the shadows parted, revealing a courtyard filled with strange, flickering shapes. The floor was covered in tiles that seemed to move, like puzzle pieces rearranging themselves, and the walls were lined with mirrors that reflected not what was in front of them, but scenes from other places. Places Bobo had never seen before. The mirrors showed forests made of crystal, oceans that shimmered with light, and deserts where the sand glowed under a sky full of moons. As Bobo watched, the mirrors changed, shifting to show different images, each one more fantastical than the last. It was as if the castle was filled with windows to other worlds, all spinning and shifting, never quite settling on one thing for long. The shadow floated beside Bobo, its outline flickering in and out of focus. "These are the reflections of dreams," it said, "dreams that have been lost, forgotten, or simply drifted away. They come here to dance with the shadows for a while before they fade into the night." Bobo wasn't sure what to make of this, but it found the idea oddly comforting. The blue orb flickered in agreement, and the shadow seemed to notice, its outline stretching into a shape that almost resembled a smile. "Would you like to dance with them?" the shadow asked. "Even a balloon can dance if it learns to move with the night." Bobo's string twitched with excitement, and before it could decide, the shadows began to swirl around it, forming patterns that pulsed with a strange, rhythmic energy. The mirrors flickered, reflecting not just the otherworldly scenes, but Bobo itself, spinning and twirling among the shadows. The tiles on the floor rearranged themselves, forming a spiral that seemed to stretch out into infinity. And Bobo found itself drifting along, carried by the gentle pull of the dance. The shadows moved with Bobo, guiding it through the courtyard, past the flickering mirrors and the swirling tiles. It was like being in a dream within a dream, where everything was fluid, shifting, and yet perfectly in sync. The blue orb danced along, its light bouncing off the mirrors, creating sparks of color that seemed to float in the air. As Bobo spun and twirled, it felt a sense of lightness, of freedom that was different from floating on the wind. Here, in the castle of shadows, there was no need to hurry, no need to know where the journey would end. It could simply drift, letting the shadows carry it, knowing that they would never let it fall. But just as suddenly as the dance had begun, it started to slow. The shadows pulled back, the mirrors dimming, and the courtyard fell silent once more. The shadow that had welcomed Bobo floated closer, its outline flickering softly. "The dance is over for now," it said, "but you will carry a piece of it with you wherever you go. That is the gift of the night." Bobo's string gave a little bounce, and the blue orb flickered as if to say thank you. The shadow bowed once more, and then it began to dissolve, fading into the darkness of the castle. "Safe travels, little balloon," it whispered, its voice echoing softly. "May your journey be as endless as the night." The wind returned, wrapping around Bobo like a gentle embrace, lifting it up and out of the courtyard, back into the open sky. The castle of shadows drifted away, its spinning towers fading into the dark, until it was just a memory, a shadow in the distance. As Bobo floated onward, the sky began to lighten, the stars fading one by one. The blue orb bobbed beside it, its light warm and steady, and Bobo felt a sense of calm. The night had been strange and wonderful, but it was time to move on, to see what else the wind had in store. And so, with the shadows of the castle still lingering in its string, Bobo drifted into the dawn, ready for the next chapter of its journey, whatever that might be. Chapter 6. Garden of Giggles. The wind was gentle as it carried Bobo into the lightening sky, a soft breeze that seemed to hum a little tune as it floated along. The blue orb flickered beside it, twirling happily, and Bobo felt a sense of anticipation. The night had been filled with shadows and whispers, but now, as dawn began to stretch across the horizon, it felt like the wind was taking Bobo somewhere brighter, somewhere warmer. As the sky turned from inky blue to a pale golden pink, Bobo saw something new ahead, an expanse of lush, green hills dotted with bright, colorful flowers. The flowers were huge, with petals that looked like they had been painted with every color imaginable, and they were swaying back and forth, almost as if they were waving hello. The wind dipped lower, guiding Bobo toward the hills, and as it got closer, Bobo could hear something unexpected, a sound like soft, high-pitched laughter. Bobo drifted down, and the flowers began to giggle. Not just a little chuckle, but full, joyous giggles that echoed across the hills, filling the air with a sound that was both delightful and a bit ridiculous. The flowers weren't just swaying, they were shaking with laughter, their petals fluttering as they giggled uncontrollably. Bobo's string wobbled in surprise, and the blue orb flickered brightly, as if laughing along. The wind set Bobo down gently among the flowers, and immediately the giggling grew louder. One particularly large flower, with petals in a shade of purple, so bright it almost hurt to look at, leaned down and wiggled its leaves in a way that could only be described as a dance. "Look at you," the purple flower said between giggles. "A balloon. Oh, how wonderful. It's been ages since we've seen a balloon around here. You must be terribly fun at parties." Bobo bounced slightly, and the blue orb gave a little shimmy, which only made the flowers giggle harder. The laughter was infectious, and soon it was impossible to tell which flower was laughing at what. They were all just caught up in a wave of pure, joyful sound. The petals shimmered in the morning light, their colors blending and swirling, creating patterns that changed with every movement. The purple flower, still shaking with laughter, leaned closer to Bobo. "We're the giggle flowers, you see," it said, trying to catch its breath. "We laugh at everything, especially the things that don't make any sense. And you, little balloon, are a delightfully nonsensical surprise." Bobo's string twitched, and the blue orb bobbed up and down, its light flashing playfully. The wind rustled through the flowers, making them sway and shake, and for a moment, it felt like the whole garden was caught in a dance. The giggles turned into a chorus, a melody of silly, joyful sounds that bounced off the hills and echoed back, making everything seem just a little bit brighter. Bobo floated among the flowers, enjoying the strange, delightful chaos. It didn't matter that nothing made sense. Bobo was used to that by now. The flowers' giggles were like music, and Bobo found itself twirling and spinning, letting the laughter carry it along. The blue orb zipped around, weaving between the flowers, its light flickering like a spark in a bonfire. As the giggles grew louder, something even stranger happened. The flowers began to rise from the ground, their roots loosening until they were floating, just like Bobo. They drifted up, petals open wide, their laughter ringing out as they formed a circle around Bobo. It was as if the whole garden had decided to join Bobo on its journey, lifting up into the sky in a colorful, giggling parade. The purple flower twirled around Bobo, its petals shimmering. "You've brought something special to our garden, little balloon," it said, its voice warm and soft, though still tinged with a giggle. "Something bright and silly. We're going to follow you and see where your nonsense takes us." Bobo's string twitched again, and the blue orb flickered brightly, as if to welcome the flowers along. The wind picked up, swirling gently, and the flowers began to float higher, carried by the breeze. They twirled and spun, their petals fluttering, creating a rainbow of colors that filled the sky, their giggles blending together into a song that was both silly and beautiful. The garden drifted upward, and as it did, Bobo realized that the flowers weren't just laughing for no reason. They were laughing because they were happy, because they were free. It was a kind of joy that didn't need explaining, that didn't make any sense, but was wonderful all the same. And as Bobo floated higher, surrounded by giggling, colorful flowers, it felt a warmth spread through its string, a lightness that made it feel like it could float forever. The wind tugged gently, guiding Bobo and its new friends up, higher and higher, until the hills were just a green blur below, and the sky was a bright, brilliant blue. The flowers' giggles echoed across the sky, carried by the wind, and for a moment, it was as if the whole world was filled with laughter. Then, slowly, the wind began to shift, and the flowers drifted back down, their petals settling gently on the hills below. One by one, they returned to the ground, their giggles fading into soft, contented murmurs. The purple flower was the last to let go, its petals brushing against Bobo's string as it drifted away. "Thank you for bringing us a little bit of nonsense," it said, its voice quieter now, but still full of warmth. "The world can always use a bit more of that." Bobo gave a gentle bounce, and the blue orb flickered one last time before the wind carried it away, up and onward, leaving the garden of giggles behind. The flowers waved their petals as they watched Bobo go, their bright colors shimmering in the morning light. As Bobo floated into the sky, the sound of laughter still echoed faintly in its string, a reminder of the joy it had found in the most unexpected of places. The wind was stronger now, carrying Bobo forward, and the blue orb glowed brightly beside it, as if it too had been touched by the giggles of the flowers. The journey wasn't over yet, and Bobo was ready for whatever came next. After all, in a world where even flowers could giggle, anything was possible. Chapter 7, Bridge of Winds. Bobo floated higher, the wind carrying it beyond the garden of giggles, and into a sky that was beginning to change once more. The blue orb flickered beside it, twinkling softly as if it could sense the shift. The air grew cooler, and Bobo noticed something new up ahead. Long, thin strands of silver stretching across the sky, forming a delicate, shimmering bridge. The bridge didn't look like any bridge Bobo had ever seen. It was woven from thin threads of light, twisting and curling like strands of spider silk, and it stretched out into the distance, vanishing into a misty haze. The threads seemed to hum softly, vibrating with a melody so faint that Bobo could barely hear it, but it felt the song in its string, like a gentle, rhythmic pulse. The wind guided Bobo onto the bridge, and as soon as it touched the silver strands, the humming grew louder. The blue orb flickered in surprise, and the strands around Bobo began to glow, their light rippling outward in waves. It was as if the bridge was alive, responding to Bobo's presence, welcoming it with a song that was both strange and soothing. As Bobo drifted along the bridge, it realized that the strands were not just humming, they were whispering. Tiny, breathy voices, too soft to make out clearly, murmured and sighed as if they were telling secrets to the wind. The whispers grew louder, weaving together into a chorus that echoed through the air, surrounding Bobo in a cocoon of sound. The bridge twisted and turned, leading Bobo through loops and spirals, dipping down and then soaring up again, as if it couldn't decide where it wanted to go. The whispers followed, growing louder and softer, sometimes laughing, sometimes sighing, but never stopping. The words didn't make any sense, but they felt familiar, like a lullaby that you've forgotten but still hum to yourself when you're half asleep. The blue orb darted around, bouncing off the strands of light and sending ripples of color across the bridge. It seemed to be enjoying itself, and Bobo felt a sense of calm, letting the whispers carry it along. The bridge felt endless, stretching out into the mist, but Bobo wasn't in a hurry. It drifted slowly, watching as the threads of light twisted and untwisted, forming patterns that changed with every step. As Bobo floated along, a strand of light brushed against its string, sending a shiver through it. The whispering grew louder, and Bobo could make out a single word: remember. The word echoed in its string, repeating over and over, as if the bridge was trying to tell it something important, something it had forgotten. But Bobo had no memories to remember, no past to recall. It was just a balloon, drifting on the wind, following the journey wherever it led. The whispering continued, filling the air with words that made no sense. But Bobo didn't mind. It was nice to listen to, even if it didn't mean anything. The bridge began to narrow, the strands pulling closer together, and the mist grew thicker, swirling around Bobo like a soft, silvery blanket. The whispers faded, growing softer and softer until they were barely audible, just a faint echo that lingered in the air. The blue orb flickered, its light dimming, and Bobo felt a sense of anticipation, as if something was about to happen. Then, just as the whispers were about to fade completely, the bridge gave a gentle shudder, and a figure appeared in the mist. It was made of light, its outline shifting and flickering, and it hovered above the bridge, its form barely visible. The figure didn't have a face, but Bobo could feel it watching, studying it with a curiosity that matched its own. "You've come a long way," the figure said, its voice soft and echoing, like a whisper carried on the wind. "But the journey isn't over yet. The wind has more to show you." Bobo's string twitched, and the blue orb flickered brightly, as if to say it was ready. The figure tilted its head, and the strands of the bridge began to pulse, their light growing brighter. The mist parted, revealing a new path, a new direction for the wind to take. The figure drifted back, its form dissolving into the mist, but its voice lingered, a gentle whisper that echoed through the air. "Remember," it said, the word echoing one last time before fading into silence. The wind picked up, stronger than before, tugging Bobo forward, guiding it off the bridge and into the open sky. The whispers faded, but Bobo could still feel them, like a distant echo that lingered in its string. The blue orb flickered beside it, its light steady and bright, and Bobo felt a sense of calm, a sense of readiness for whatever came next. The bridge of whispering winds was behind it, but the journey continued, stretching out into the unknown, and Bobo was ready to follow, to drift along the wind, to see where the path would lead. Chapter 8. Maze of Mirrors. Bobo drifted onward, carried by the wind past the shimmering bridge and into a sky that seemed to stretch on forever. The blue orb flickered beside it, casting a gentle glow that made the mist around them sparkle like tiny stars. Bobo had seen so many strange and wonderful things on this journey, but it still felt like there was something waiting ahead, something new. As they moved, the mist began to thin, revealing a vast expanse of silvery glass stretching out below. Bobo's string twitched in curiosity as it floated lower, and the wind guided it gently down until it was hovering just above the surface. It wasn't water, though it shimmered like a lake. It was solid, smooth, and reflective, like a giant mirror laid out beneath the sky. Bobo glanced down and saw its own reflection, along with the tiny blue orb. But as it continued to look, the reflections started to change. They blurred and rippled, shifting until Bobo was no longer seeing itself, but other balloons, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, all different shapes and colors, all floating aimlessly across the mirror's surface. Each balloon had its own little orb, just like Bobo's, and the orbs flickered brightly, like fireflies in the night. The wind nudged Bobo forward, guiding it across the mirror, and as it floated along, the reflections changed again. Now, Bobo could see other scenes, images of the places it had been: the Garden of Giggles, the Castle of Shadows, the Meadow of Melodic Mushrooms. They all appeared on the mirror's surface, as if the glass was showing Bobo a replay of its journey. Bobo's string twitched nervously. It had seen mirrors before, back at the Castle of Shadows, but this felt different. The reflections didn't just show the past. They felt alive, as if they were watching, waiting for something. The blue orb flickered beside Bobo, its light dimming slightly, and the wind grew colder, more urgent. And then Without warning, the mirror rippled, and Bobo found itself sinking down through the glass as if it had become liquid. The blue orb bobbed frantically, trying to stay afloat, but the mirror pulled them both down, swallowing them in a swirl of light and color. Bobo tumbled through the mirror, its string twisting and curling as the world around it blurred and spun. The blue orb flickered wildly, its light stuttering, and for a moment, everything was dark, silent, and still. Then, with a sudden jolt, Bobo landed softly on solid ground, the blue orb settling beside it. It was in a maze. Tall, shimmering walls stretched up on all sides, their surfaces smooth and reflective, like mirrors. The corridors twisted and turned, leading off in every direction, and each wall reflected Bobo and the blue orb, over and over again, until it was impossible to tell where the reflections ended and the real Bobo began. The wind was gone, leaving Bobo to float aimlessly through the maze. It moved slowly, gliding past the mirrored walls, but every turn seemed to lead to the same place, the same endless reflections. The blue orb flickered nervously, its light casting shadows that danced across the mirrors. But no matter where Bobo went, it couldn't find a way out. As it drifted deeper into the maze, Bobo noticed something strange. The reflections in the mirrors were no longer copying its movements exactly. They were moving on their own, sometimes lagging behind, sometimes darting ahead, as if they were trying to lead Bobo somewhere. One reflection, in particular, caught Bobo's attention. It was slightly larger than the others, and its orb was a different color, a bright, electric green instead of blue. The green orb flickered brightly, and the reflection gestured for Bobo to follow. Bobo hesitated, its string twitching nervously, but the green orb pulsed again, as if urging it forward. Bobo floated toward the reflection, and as it did, the mirrored wall seemed to dissolve, revealing a new path. The green orb reflection darted ahead, leading Bobo through the maze, down corridors that twisted and turned, each one looking exactly like the last. But the reflection never hesitated, always moving with purpose, and Bobo followed, unsure of what else to do. Finally, the maze opened up into a large, circular chamber. The walls were still mirrored, but the reflections here were different, faded, ghostly, as if they were memories left behind by something long gone. In the center of the chamber stood another balloon, but this one was completely transparent, almost invisible, with no orb by its side. Bobo's string twitched, and the blue orb flickered brightly, its light casting a soft glow across the chamber. The transparent balloon drifted closer, its surface shimmering, and Bobo could see tiny cracks running through it, as if it was made of glass that had been shattered and then put back together. "You've come a long way," the transparent balloon said, its voice soft and echoing, like a whisper trapped in a bottle. "But you're not the first." Bobo's string wobbled, and the blue orb flickered uncertainly. The transparent balloon floated around Bobo, inspecting it carefully, and for a moment, the mirrors seemed to flicker, showing glimpses of other balloons, other orbs, all drifting aimlessly through the maze. "The maze brings you here because it wants to know," the transparent balloon continued. "Do you wish to keep drifting, or do you want to find your way home?" Bobo didn't have a home, not that it could remember. It had always been drifting, carried by the wind, following wherever it led. But the question hung in the air, heavy and uncertain, and for the first time, Bobo felt a tiny pang of doubt. What if the journey was supposed to end somewhere? What if there was a place it was meant to find? The green orb reflection appeared beside the transparent balloon, its light pulsing brightly, and the mirrors around the chamber began to shimmer, their surfaces rippling. For a brief moment, Bobo saw a familiar image, a small hand reaching up, trying to grasp a bright red balloon. The reflection was hazy, distorted, but it was unmistakably real. "You can keep drifting," said the transparent balloon, its voice softer now. "Or you can choose to return, but the choice must be yours." The mirrors flickered, and the image faded, leaving Bobo staring at its own reflection, the blue orb glowing softly beside it. The maze was silent, waiting, as if holding its breath. Bobo's string twitched, and the blue orb flickered, casting tiny sparks of light across the chamber. And then, slowly, Bobo began to float upward, rising higher, away from the mirrored walls and the transparent balloon. The green orb reflection pulsed one last time, then faded into the shadows, leaving Bobo to drift alone, back toward the surface of the mirror. The wind returned, gentle and steady, catching Bobo and lifting it up, guiding it out of the maze and back into the open sky. The blue orb flickered beside it, and for the first time, Bobo felt a sense of direction, a sense of purpose. It didn't know what lay ahead, but it was ready to find out. The maze disappeared behind it, swallowed by the mist, and the wind carried Bobo forward, faster than before, as if eager to show it something new. The journey wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time, Bobo knew that there was an end, somewhere out there, waiting to be found. Chapter 9, Where the Wind Ends. The wind carried Bobo swiftly, cutting through the mist with a sense of urgency that hadn't been there before. The blue orb flickered beside it, its light bright and steady, as if it knew that this part of the journey was different. Bobo had always let the wind guide it, drifting without direction, but now, for the first time, it felt like there was somewhere to be, somewhere the wind needed to take it. The sky around Bobo darkened, clouds swirling overhead, and the wind grew stronger, almost pushing instead of guiding. Bobo's string fluttered wildly, and the blue orb zipped nervously around it, as if trying to keep pace. The sky was a deep, stormy gray, the kind of color that makes you feel like something big is about to happen. And Bobo felt its string tighten, the anticipation building. Then, through the swirling clouds, Bobo saw it, a giant, dark shape looming in the distance, blocking out the light. It was a wall, an enormous, endless wall that stretched across the sky, as if someone had drawn a line and said, "This is where it all stops." The wall was solid, impenetrable, and it seemed to swallow everything that came near it. The wind pushed Bobo toward the wall, faster and faster, as if there was no time to waste. The blue orb flickered brightly, darting ahead, but when it got close to the wall, it stopped, bouncing back like a rubber ball. Bobo floated closer, its string trembling, and as it approached the wall, it realized that this was where the wind ended. There was nowhere else to go. The wall wasn't smooth. It was covered in tiny, intricate patterns, like cracks in old porcelain, and as Bobo drifted closer, the patterns began to move. They twisted and curled, forming shapes that Bobo recognized: the Garden of Giggles, the Castle of Shadows, the Bridge of Whispering Winds. Every place Bobo had been, every strange and nonsensical sight it had seen, was etched into the surface of the wall, shifting and changing as if it was alive. Bobo's string twitched, and the blue orb flickered, casting a faint light across the wall. The patterns twisted, converging on a single point, and for the first time, Bobo saw a small, round door, just big enough for a balloon to float through. The door was cracked open, and through the gap, Bobo could see a soft, warm light, inviting and familiar. The wind stopped completely, leaving Bobo to hover in front of the door, its string swaying gently. The blue orb darted around, flickering nervously, but Bobo felt calm. This was it, the end of the journey. The wall had brought it here, to this door, and Bobo knew that whatever was on the other side was waiting for it. Slowly, Bobo drifted forward, slipping through the door. The light enveloped it, warm and bright, and for a moment, everything was still. Bobo's string relaxed, and the blue orb flickered one last time before going dark, fading into the light. When the light cleared, Bobo found itself back where it had started. The sky was blue, the sun was shining, and below, Bobo could see the park. The same park where it had first slipped from the child's hand. There were people walking, children playing, and in the distance, Bobo could see the tiny dot of a red balloon floating up into the sky. But something was different. The park was still there, but everything was off. The colors were too bright, the sounds too loud, and the people moved in strange, jerky patterns like marionettes on strings. It was as if Bobo had stepped into a version of reality that was close to the real thing, but not quite right. Like a dream that almost makes sense, but slips away when you try to remember it. Bobo's string twitched, and the blue orb, which had been dark, flickered back to life, glowing a bright electric green. The light pulsed, faster and faster, until it was almost blinding. And then, without warning, the world around Bobo shattered. The park, the sky, the people, all of it broke apart, splintering into tiny shards that drifted away like pieces of glass. Bobo was floating in a vast, empty space, surrounded by fragments of everything it had seen, everything it had thought was real. The blue orb flickered wildly, and for the first time, Bobo felt a pang of fear. What was happening? Where was it? From the darkness, a voice echoed, low and resonant, like the tolling of a distant bell. "You've seen the end of the wind," it said, "but the journey doesn't end here." Bobo turned, and in the distance, it saw a figure, a giant, swirling mass of light and shadow, shifting and changing, impossible to pin down. The figure stretched out, filling the space around it, and as it moved, Bobo could see that it was made up of all the places it had been. The garden, the castle, the maze, they were all part of this thing, this endless, shifting mass that seemed to have no beginning and no end. "You are not lost," the voice said, softer now, as if trying to comfort Bobo. "You are part of the journey, part of the wind, and now you will become the guide." Before Bobo could react, the blue orb pulsed one last time, and then it shattered, sending a burst of light through the darkness. The light twisted, coiling around Bobo, and Bobo's string felt tight, pulling, tugging, as if something was trying to unravel it. And then Bobo understood. The journey hadn't been about finding a destination. It had been about becoming something new, something different. The wind hadn't been carrying Bobo. It had been guiding it, preparing it. And now, as the light coiled tighter and tighter, Bobo felt its string begin to unwind, the threads spinning out, stretching across the empty space, weaving a new path, a new journey. The light dimmed, and the figure began to fade, leaving Bobo floating alone. Its string stretched out into the distance, forming a long, shimmering thread that twisted and curled through the darkness. The wind returned, gentle and soft, brushing against the thread, and Bobo felt a sense of peace. It wasn't a balloon anymore. It was something more, something that had no shape, no form, but was still part of everything it had seen. The wind tugged at the thread, and the thread began to move, weaving through the darkness, creating new paths, new places, and Bobo knew, deep down, that this was how it was meant to be. It would drift on, not as a balloon, but as part of the wind itself, guiding others on their journeys, leading them through the nonsense and wonder that made up the world. The journey didn't end. It just began again, over and over, looping through the wind, through the light and the dark, through all the places that had no name, no sense, but were still beautiful. And so, as the wind carried it forward, Bobo became the wind, the guide, the endless thread that stretched across the sky, whispering to those who would follow. Until next time, let your dreams carry you to places where wonder and nonsense blend, and where each step brings you closer to the peaceful rest you deserve. Sleep well, and sweet dreams.